If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it would be greatly appreciated if you could give the podcast a 5-star rating. This helps other listeners just like you discover the show. Thank you. This is Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism. I'm your host, Andrew Pledger, and I'm a survivor of Bob Jones University. BJU is a fundamentalist college with its roots in white supremacy and is known for its culture of indoctrination, conformity, and control. Its influence extends beyond its campus, impacting Christian schooling, politics, biblical counseling, and evangelical Christianity. The school serves as a hub for churches, schools, and camps, and these institutions perpetrate its abusive teachings and practices. This show explores these areas of influence and amplifies the stories of those who have been impacted by Bob Jones University. This is Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism. Hello, listeners. I am really looking forward to you hearing this interview, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. But on this episode, I interviewed Rebecca Worthington, and she shares her journey in growing up Freewill Baptist and then ending up at Bob Jones University. And throughout her journey, she discusses just the pressure to be perfect, to constantly be doing. And she also talks a lot about the impact on fundamentalism's view on women and also purity culture and the impact that has had on her. And towards the end of the episode, she really shares just inspiring insights from a tarot card reading, and I hope you find it as inspiring and encouraging as I did. But enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. I am really excited to have Rebecca Worthington on the show today. How are you doing, Rebecca?
I'm doing great. It's so nice to get to meet you finally after I've been listening to the podcast a little bit, and I feel like I know you already. So, but it's really good to get to meet you.
It's great to get to meet you too. And I know we were talking quite a bit before we started recording, so I'm glad we got to do that and discuss a lot of different things. But I'm really curious, for people who are not familiar with you, could you do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Rebecca Worthington, and I currently live in Massachusetts, but I grew up in North Carolina. I attended Bob Jones University from 2003 was my freshman year of undergrad until 2007. And then I stuck around for 2 more years and did a master's degree and a GA-ship in the voice department. So I studied church music for undergrad, and then my master's, also from Bob Jones, is in voice performance. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And like when I get into interviews with people, I really do love to start in the beginning. Like, they got to Bob Jones University for a reason. It didn't come out of nowhere. There's usually a lot of influence from a young age or somewhere before. And so I'm really curious about your own upbringing in Christianity and what that was like and how that really influenced you early in life and also influenced your worldview.
Gosh, I think it's funny because people end up at Bob Jones for a number of reasons. Like you've had people on the podcast already who it was just expected of them because it was the path their parents or their grandparents or some other family member had gone to Bob Jones, and they were on that treadmill that took them to Bob Jones as well. And there's some people that choose it of their own volition. I happen to be one of those people. And it's so funny because I started to really analyze what my own motivations were. And to be really honest with you, a good portion of it is that I was truly in it. You know what I mean? I was serving, I was working in my local church all growing up. Pretty much the story goes that my pastor, so I grew up in a Freewill Baptist church, which is a little bit outside of the Bob Jones scope, but very, very closely related. So doctrinally, Freewill Baptist would skew just a little bit outside of typical IFB doctrine or like Southern Baptist doctrine that maybe people might be more familiar with who attend Bob Jones. But for me, what that looks like is that, we had everything that the IFB would have, or that Independent Fundamentalist Baptist. That's the same thing. The Independent Fundamentalist Baptist would have, but we did not believe in internal security. And so, those Bible verses that talk about apostasy or being able to commit a sin unto death or whatever, we took those seriously. And so that was an interesting thing because that kind of influenced me a little bit to not go to Bob Jones, but because we were doing a lot of things with other churches that were kind of in that vein, or that were kind of in IFB associated with that, or Southern Baptist in general, I kind of migrated my way over there. But one of the things that I noticed about just kind of like how things were conditioned. So I grew up in the South. I think for those of us who grow up in the South, there may be a little bit of extra level of scrutiny, the way that you look, the way that you perform your gender, the way that you perform your sexuality, the way that you just perform your everyday life has to be very specific. And I learned very early on from my parents growing up in that atmosphere, like the messages that I got from my parents very much were, to look right and do right in front of other people, especially. But those growing up years in the church basically were pretty typical of what you would think. It was services Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. When I was in about junior high, we got a new youth pastor in, and I was very, very close with him and his wife. And once they came in, that was really when I started to see a lot of influences that were maybe even more strict than what I had been brought up to do. So while we were so I'll give you one example of church expectations versus parental expectations. So when this youth pastor came in, his wife, they started really talking to us, those of us who were in the youth group, and started bringing us in really close. They would write notes to us, on the first day of school, telling us they were praying for us, very sweet things that you're not used to having happen to you as a high schooler or a junior high kid, and they really drew you in. They really tried to build up the youth group as this little core group. So there were some of us who were more elite that they would put a little bit more time into. And I put that in quotes because that's not ever anything that anybody said to us, but that was kind of the way that it was understood. There was a small group of us. And then as kids came in, maybe they were on the out fringes, but they would kind of get drawn into that inner group for, closer discipleship or whatever, And when they came in, I would say that the messaging became really ramped up around certain things. One of those was purity culture. And I remember being invited to the church. Now, purity culture, from my parents' perspective, I heard nothing, absolutely nothing from them on that.
For people who aren't familiar, could you kind of explain purity culture a little bit?
Oh, yeah, of course. So basically, the idea that you cannot have any sort of sexual relations until you are married is the idea of purity. And purity culture, really what it is kind of an extension of patriarchy to keep women and people in their lane, and has a lot of roots in racism as well, because when people started talking about purity in the church, it was so that you're not mixing with those people over there, whether that be immigrants or people of another race or whatever, however you want to consider that. And so purity culture, I would say that there were definitely a lot of youth conference messages and things like that, but they really ramped it up when we started coming, when that youth pastor came in. And I remember one time being invited to the church because they were going to have like a parent-child movie night for the teens and parents. And I didn't really know what it was, but I had to sit with my parents, and it was a video how to keep yourself pure and the importance of keeping yourself pure. So in purity culture, there's this thing where a lot of times, like, this pastor, I saw it on Facebook, which was really weird. They took pictures, but he took his daughter out to dinner when she was probably 12, 13, something like that, and gave her a ring as her like purity ring. So a reminder that she's never supposed to, have sex with anybody until she's married. She was to make that commitment to her father on this dinner date. And so, that is the person that's behind this. And so even for those of us who our parents weren't pressuring us to make those kinds of decisions at home, they were connecting the dots for us, that we had to sit there in that uncomfortable space of talking about those things with our parents and like being present. And I just remember going home and both of my parents were like, that was really intense and weird. And even them, as much as they were dyed in the wool and like conservative Christianity, that was even a bit much for them. So that kind of thing happened where there was some dissonance between like what my parents was teaching, what the church was teaching. And over time, I started picking up other things, like my parents went to the movies and they rented movies. And through the influence of this youth pastor and his wife, I stopped going to the movies because we need to avoid the appearance of evil. And I can remember one time my parents rented a movie and they tried really hard to pick like the most like G-rated thing they could find at the movie rental store. And I stayed in my room while they watched it. And they were like watching it in the living room. I just stayed in my room, and I don't know what I did. I like listened to music or something, probably something super, conservative. And the movie was Anna and the King, which I still to this day have never seen, but everybody who's seen it is like, that is the most tame movie. Like, I can't believe that you would think that would have anything bad in it, but it was only because it had been rented. So that was another thing. This youth pastor also, his wife did not wear pants and had like a lot of weird things to say about that. And like, they made it seem, it was almost like they had this idea of a Christian, but then like we were supposed to be this elite version of it. And just thinking about things from that perspective, like my parents let me wear pants, but I stopped wearing pants. My parents let me go to the movies, and I really enjoyed going to the movies. I had really great childhood memories of doing those things, but I quit doing that. And I started closing myself off from a lot of parts of normal life. I jumped out of a public school, which was less than 2 miles from my home, to having to drive 40 minutes to a Christian school that my parents had to pay for. And I was in public school before until 9th grade, and 10th through 12th grade, I went to Christian school, and it was really a lot of their influence. And for me, it was really steady in the pursuit of earnestly serving God. Like, that was all I wanted to do. And they were telling me, well, in order to do this, you have to be so closed off, and you have to be, this, that, and the other thing. I think the other thing too, that kind of helps me think about like where the ship got kind of steered in the Bob Jones direction too, is once you get into that, you also have other churches that you are doing things with. So like activities, conferences, that kind of thing. So I will say that even though I went to a Freewill Baptist church and there were some differences in doctrine, it was similar enough that they were comfortable sending us to youth conferences. So I've been to the Wilds, I've been to the summer camp, I've been to, for people who don't know about the Wild, that Christian camp in Brevard, North Carolina, that has been exposed for some definitely non-inclusive and abusive practices, definitely some traumatic preaching that they have. And because I went to the Christian school, I had not only went in the summertime with my church, but I went with my Christian school for the leadership conference during the school year. And let me tell you, the leadership conference is way better because they don't make you play all the games, like with big ball and all of that. mess that they make you do. But anyway, so, and obviously sowing those seeds that way. When we were talking before, I mentioned to you that we went to the Gospel Light Youth Conference every year, which is the church that you mentioned that you grew up in.
Yeah.
And what was that like, by the way, when youth conference time came around? Was it just like a mad dash and everybody went crazy planning and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, my family, we were not involved with the planning of it. Once I got in the teen years, though, I was pressured to help with setting up and taking down and
Mm-hmm.
things. So I did help a lot with that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was just a busy week all around and just a lot of typical fear-based messaging that goes on, a lot of purity culture, sermons and different things. But I honestly, I did look forward to it every year because we would go to Carowinds, the
Mm-hmm.
amusement park one of the days. You would do the sermon in the morning, then the rest of the day we would go to Carowinds and have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we literally rented Wet and Wild's water park. We
Yes.
rented it out, and we had like special times. All right, girls are going in this
Yes.
time and their little culotte stuff, and then the guys are going to arrive and wait at the gate and wait till every single girl leaves, and they can never
Uh-huh.
be seen, and shuffle the
Uh-huh.
guys in to come. And it's just so ridiculous. Like that's an extreme example of purity culture, like how
Yep.
worried they were. Oh
Yep.
my God, it's crazy. But
Every single camp that I went to had different times for men and women to swim. That water park example is 1,000% true, that you get released into the water park and then everybody just comes back. But, it's so funny because I can't remember if it must have been Carowinds, but one of the times, so we went 3 or 4 years. I went a bunch of times to Gospel Light Youth Conference. And there was one year where I got separated from my group because they, in their preaching all week, kept telling you, like, even as you're out and about in the park, you should be sharing Jesus with everybody that you're with. And I had that. And again, what am I supposed to be? I'm not supposed to be just a Christian who goes to church. I'm supposed to be a Christian who gets out there, who's sharing, who is making disciples. And as I grew up, I wanted to be a missions major. I felt called to go and be a missionary. And I won't share much of that because a lot of that was just a product of that high performance time that I was in junior high and high school. But, I even suppressed my own like musical interest. I eventually changed my major back to music, but that high performance culture, yeah. So anyway, I had those messages in my head, witnessing. So there's this whole group of like degular teenage girls. And I don't know how, but I strike up a conversation with them in Carowinds and start witnessing to them in Carowinds. And my friends don't want to stop me because they know what I'm doing is a good thing, quote unquote, a good thing. And these girls were so nice, but they were like, okay, I'm done listening to you now. Like after like, talking to them and trying to get them to like pray and all these things and trying to get them to understand that they needed salvation. And they were like, maybe we'll just pray a little bit later on today. Like, it's fine. And we left. But yeah, I got separated from my group because of that on the day that the Gospel Light people descended upon Carowinds for that day. Yeah.
yeah, I do remember that pressure too.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like seeing my friend do it, but I never ended up doing it because it was just so uncomfortable for me. And I was always really shy growing up too, but I was just like, it felt weird to me to do it. And it's just like, and I remember having anxiety during that time there because I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to witness this. So I need to find someone to witness to. And just, I remember being told, you could be the reason that someone burns in hell for eternity because
Yes.
you didn't have the courage to share the gospel with them, and now they're going to suffer. So people's salvation was on our backs
Mm-hmm.
that we had to be
All the time.
responsible for. And looking back, I'm like, now that's really messed up, and that's a big weight to put on children and on anyone in general, adults altogether too. But just from a young age, that fear, that sense of urgency that's instilled of like we need to recruit people, we gotta give them salvation, and they need to turn their lives around. And anyways, it was just so messed up.
Mm-hmm. And that pressure's there. And it's funny that you mentioned how uncomfortable it is. It was uncomfortable for me too. You know, I'm an outgoing person. I was 1,000 times more outgoing when I was junior high and high school, especially just like bubbly, wanted to be in and around people all the time, wanted to socialize. And so I had some of those things that in me already that it was easy to kind of strike up a conversation with a stranger, but it just felt really nerve wracking to have those conversations, especially in public, like trying to sit on the side of some like roller coaster ride and have a like conversation about somebody's eternal soul. Like, who in the world do I think I was? You know? And it's just, but the reason why I'm mentioning that is because you do so many things to go along with what you're supposed to do, because you're not this regular level of Christian. You're the elite level of Christian, you know? And so in order to be that special level, these are the things that are expected of you. And, you know, to kind of like tie up that and put a little bow on that little chapter, so much of those messages were kind of what put you in that vein of suppressing what you think is good, suppressing what feels good to you, going with the things that make you uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable, living with cognitive dissonance all of the time. And that's the world that you're in. And then you're expected, okay, if you want to be a regular Christian, you can go to community college. If you want to be a regular Christian, you can go to a state school, whatever. But there's these Christian colleges that we're just going to throw in front of your face all of the time. And having gone to Christian school, that happened even more. And so, you know, when I went to Bob Jones to visit for the very first time, think about who I was at that moment, somebody who's performing no matter what. And we can kind of get into some more about like some of the messages that my parents told me personally. I think we're kind of talking about the church's messaging mostly right now, but it's interesting how the person that I was the very first time I walked onto Bob Jones campus just to visit, I went with my school. It was on the way to a wild leadership conference. We stopped off at Bob Jones to tour. Our principal had a daughter that went there. So we come onto campus. They give us a tour. There were a couple different reasons why I wanted to go to Bob Jones. One, the campus was huge and beautiful, and having grown up in Freewill Baptist churches, the Freewill Baptist schools you've got Hillsdale College that you could have gone to, which nobody from our constituency knew anything about. There was Freewill Baptist Bible College in Nashville, and that was where my pastor had gone. But for me, that wasn't really an option because everybody was talking about how they had really gone liberal and they were not as conservative as they used to be, and all these things. And so I had to find a certain type of school that was going to fit the bill of the right kind of conservatism for everybody else around me. And I had to pick a school that, and for me personally, I didn't want to go someplace where all I was going to be was a teacher or a secretarial degree or whatever. And so that was the only other choice of Freewill Baptist School, was one that I didn't feel presented as good of an educational opportunity. And so I ended up having to go a little bit outside of my denomination that I grew up in. And so I stepped foot on the Bob Jones campus. We're touring the alumni building. One of the things that there are no German missionaries in Freewill Baptist, the Freewill Baptist denomination. I learned that when I was like 14 or 15 years old. And ever since then, I was like dead set on going to Germany as a missionary. And so I started learning German. I took German all 2 years of high school. And I'm taking the tour of Bob Jones, and I hear the German class going on because we toured the alumni building. And so I'm like, oh, I have to go here because this is the only college that offers German, because everything was about being that elite, going to the mission field, telling people about Jesus. Everything was all this pressure to be so much more than what you wanted to be, really. And so for me, that was the way that I could have the most earnest expression of my faith, get the most good education, I thought, in my mind, of the schools that I had offered to me. Because when you start looking at the Christian universities, there's not a ton of great options if you want good education.
I know, I know. And like that's what I tell people, why I ended up at Bob Jones was I was looking for a Christian college with good education and
Mhm.
they had the accreditation, and I was looking for a Christian college with a wide array of options, which I was actually and really impressed with how many majors that Bob Jones offered in all these different fields, and it was going to end up working out for what I wanted to do, thankfully. But yeah, I know like when you want outside of missions or ministry, it's hard to find those Christian colleges. I'm trying to
Mhm.
think of other ones that had maybe Pensacola, they had a good selection of majors, but I don't know how wide it was. I did kind of look into that college. But yeah, Bob Jones, if you went outside of the ministry, it was usually a better option if
Mhm.
you wanted that path.
And I think too that, for better or for worse, and there's a lot of talk about this right now because of things that are going on currently at Bob Jones in the School of Fine Arts, but and a lot of budget cutting and that kind of thing. But at the time that I was looking into colleges, Bob Jones was squarely in the middle of huge work around arts. And there was an opera every year. And, for me, as somebody who was a musician, that was so much of my identity as a high schooler. I was the girl who sang in the choir and hit the high note at the end. And because of that, because I knew that that was going to be the way that I would serve on the mission field. And so that was another reason why I chose Bob Jones, was because I felt like their music department was really strong. But yeah, so that's kind of what leads you there. And then you get there and you learn a lot.
Yeah, you do. And not exactly the things you want to learn too. Yeah. Oh my God.
I know.
Ooh.
But it's
Um,
funny because, like, in some ways, I feel like Bob Jones helped me relax on some of those things. When I mentioned the pants issue, or obviously you can't go to the movies, that's a rule. But I remember going on my first SAG outing. So every year we have literary societies at Bob Jones because they don't think that, what is it, the Greek society system or the Greek fraternity sorority system, they say that it encourages bad lifestyle and, whatever. So they decided that they weren't going to adhere to that. And so they have literary societies instead. And every year your society goes on two different outings. One of those is a dating outing in which you ask someone of the opposite gender, only the opposite gender, to come with you on a date with everybody else, very heavily chaperoned by graduate assistants, because I've done that before. The other outing was a stag outing. So the very first outing that I went with on my society was a stag outing, and it was whitewater rafting. Now, I've never been whitewater rafting. I come from Eastern North Carolina. We have ocean. We don't have rapids and mountains and things like that. And so, I went in my culottes, and everybody else, literally everybody else, is wearing pants, and I'm in my culottes. And lo and behold, who's the first one to fall out of the raft? It was me, obviously. And so I fell out, and my culottes are like everywhere. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to stay modest in these culottes. Maybe I should think about wearing pants every now and then. And literally, like, my experience being at Bob Jones kind of helped me to understand, like, maybe that's a little outside of what you should be doing for your own personal beliefs or whatever. But in some ways, I feel like they helped me kind of swing the pendulum back in a little bit more balance. But in other ways, there were some really harmful messages that I think kind of kept me in a box for a lot longer, just to kind of say that at a high level.
and what are some of those harmful messages that affected you?
So much around the dating culture at Bob Jones. One of those messages was kind of just how the students were around dating. Now, obviously, within fundamentalist Christianity, not only are you supposed to stay pure, but you are also only supposed to date and marry someone who is of the opposite gender. No same sex relationships allowed. Quite frankly, let's just be honest, there was not a lot of room for asexual people either, just to kind of put that out there, because you were very encouraged from the get-go to date. Like, as much a restriction as they have around dating, like where you can date, who you can be with. You might have to have a chaperone. If you're going to go off campus, you definitely have to have a chaperone. But for all of that restriction, there was so much pressure to date and marry someone while you were there at Bob. Not necessarily marry someone, but you've got the best pool of people in the world at Bob Jones. You should be dating these people, and that's who you're going to marry. So that's one thing. I remember the very first time I got invited to an artist series, and just for people who aren't super familiar with what a Bob Jones artist series might be. So at various and sundry times throughout the year, there will be special events. It might be a symphony that comes in and plays, a concert, beautiful orchestra concert. Might be, we had like a Russian choir and symphony come in one time. We had Chanticleer, who one of my professors at the New England Conservatory that I went to later sang in, a big choir. It might be a Shakespeare play that one of the Bob Jones family members was in. Usually Dr. Bob III was always in the Shakespeare things. And so this particular thing, I think it was some kind of big concert in the FMA. So at that time, this is my freshman year, and I think it was not the first semester, but the second semester. And this guy gives me a call, and he calls me on my dorm phone. So I'm like in my room talking, and I can barely hear him. And I say, hello. And this person on the other end of the phone goes, hi, Rebecca, this is DJ. And, he says, this is DJ. I'm like, hey, DJ. And, DJ and I know each other through mutual friends. I don't know him super well, but I know he's a nice dude. I know he's a pretty jovial, fun guy, but he's talking so quietly, I can't even hear him. And I'm like, DJ, what in the world is going on? Why can't you just talk like a normal person right now? And he was calling to ask me out to artist series. And he explains to me that he is on his phone in his dorm. And he's like, and I can't talk really loud because I'm in the closet. And I was like, what are you're in the closet? Like, what are you talking about? He was in his actual closet with the room phone, probably cords sticking out into the wall. And the reason why he had to do that is because all of the boys in the dorm, if they knew that he was calling a girl to ask her on a date, they would come in and like razz him and like, all of these things. He's talking to me, and so I tell him, yes, I'll go with him, whatever. And we set up a time. The way that it normally happens is if you are a really good artist series date, number one, you get your artist series date a gift. Number two, oftentimes you will meet up ahead of time before artist series, like in the dining common or whatever, in the snack shop, like meet each other. If you're not somebody who interacts with that person a lot and it's more of like a first date kind of situation. So we had set a date to go and have a conversation in the dining common. And so he's excited. I'm excited. We're going to artist series together. We're going to lunch together on the next Sunday. And all of a sudden I hear all these like men's voices, and it's like, oh, and it just like erupts into this huge cacophony. And I don't know what in the world's going on. He's like, gotta go, bye. And he told me that people found out and they pulled him out of his closet to like not beat on him, but playful roughhousing, whatever, to like beat him up and like congratulate him because he was going on this date to artist series. So that's experience one. The second part of that is the next Sunday, we go to the dining common. We're sitting there and having a conversation. We could not go 5 minutes without someone coming by just to be like, hey, DJ, good, hey, so smarmy. Like, and it was always, male students. None of the female students cared at all that I was in there with DJ. But all of the male students, and they treat it like this really weird, like junior high thing. And it was very aggressive and very almost suggestive, even though like, what were we going to do? We were going to artist series in a room with everybody, but like almost like, hey, like thing, like thumbs upping behind my back. Like I literally turn and there's people giving him the thumbs up behind my back and all these things. And like, maybe I should be flattered by that, but also it just kind of goes in to show you like how weird everything is. That's not a normal first date situation with somebody. You know what I mean?
No. And it's like, oh, look, DJ, you got the prize. You got the girl. Blah, blah. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
so
it's
weird.
like your wildest dreams this is the pinnacle, is meeting a Christian person to date and marry. And I just remember being so skeeved out by that. You know what I mean? And we went to Artist Series. It was great. I gave him a gift that I'm pretty sure he injured somebody with and they had to go to Barge. I gave him a play sword because Lord of the Rings had come out.
I love it.
But anyway, and we didn't really see each other that much after that. We were in choirs and stuff together, but I just remember being really skeeved out by that. And almost every experience has some little earmark of that, where there's somebody insinuating something about you just chilling with another person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, relationships become so sexualized.
Yeah, they
They
really do.
mm-hmm.
And it's so weird because it happens from the get-go. When I was a high school student and I wasn't even at Bob Jones yet, I went to Opportunity Days. One of the very first things, they get up and binge Buck. I think he was in student services or whoever that guy is. And he stands up or admissions. And he stands up and he's talking about, somebody asked a question about dating. He's like, oh, Bob Jones is a perfect place to date. It's the only place to date. If you're a Christian young person, you ought to be dating at Bob Jones. Even though we have some rules, yes, we have some rules, and it's always the tactic. Yes, we have some rules to really put you in a little box and tell you exactly how and where and when it's supposed to go. So you have no autonomy, but they make it seem like you have all of the autonomy in the world and that you're going to get all of these things that you want. But when you're actually living the experience, it feels really weird. It feels really scrutinized. It feels encouraged in all of the wrong ways. And so that was kind of like the experiential side of it. And then you've got other messages. Like I was there in 2007 when there was a group called Soul Force that decided to come onto the campus. And some people from that era may remember it, but it was an LGBTQ plus activist group that was just going around to a lot of different Christian colleges. And they would send a letter ahead and they would say, we are going to be at Bob Jones on such and such a date. And we are going to have conversations with people around LGBTQ plus issues. That's it. And, obviously Bob Jones wasn't going to allow that. And so we had a whole series of messages around how homosexuality is wrong, why we can't invite Soul Force onto our campus, all of these things. And so you're getting those kinds of messages from the chapel pulpit. You're also getting messages from the Dean of Men, from the Dean of Women. You're getting messages from your Bible teachers. And let me tell you, if you take Bible teachers with women, Bible classes with women, Bible teachers, that maybe is probably the worst of the messaging that I got around dating, sexuality, who you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to manifest yourself in the world, like who your identity is. A lot of that harmful stuff came there too. I remember taking a class called Women in Christian Service because I was a church music major, which meant that I took a lot of music classes, but I also had to take quite a bit of like classes within the School of Religion. And that Women in Christian Service class was co-taught by a woman named Jan Reimers, who is the wife of somebody who is a pastor at one of the Bob Jones churches in and around the Greenville area. His name is Gary Reimers. He's also in seminary faculty at Bob Jones. And, her name was Jan. She would kind of chat about different things. The very first thing that they did is she comes in and asks how many people are engaged, how many women in the class are engaged, married, single, all of those things, because they wanted to get that. That was the very first order of business on the first day. What is your marital status? It was co-taught between her and Benneth Jones. And Benneth, I had heard go ahead.
I was going to say, for people who don't know, Benneth Jones was Bob Jones III's previous wife. She passed away, I can't remember what year it was, but she passed away kind of a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then he quickly remarried
Quickly.
he remarried my English 103 teacher. I forgot her name. Rowe? I think it was
Dr. Rowe?
Dr. Rowe. I remember we jokingly called her Dr. Death Row or something like that. But anyways, yeah, that was funny. But anyway, so yeah, Ben Jones, just for people who aren't familiar. But yeah, you can go on with the story.
So Benneth Jones, she comes in, and I remember one of her lessons, she gets up and she draws to, I don't remember if it was like a projector, because this was not high tech at all. There's no PowerPoint presentations. She either drew it on the chalkboard or it was like projected onto like a projector screen. I can't remember which, but it was a little infographic that she had that described the difference between men and women. And basically, she had like a head, and you could see like a brain on the inside of it. And it was just the way that she had drawn it: a man's head with a man's brain, and then a woman's head with a woman's brain. And she had labeled parts of the brain that were inherent to their character as she was teaching it to us as a woman in Christian service. Now, as a woman in Christian service, this is a lesson that over 16 weeks of classes, or however many classes that you get, this is important enough that it's going to make it in out of everything that you need to know about being a woman in Christian service. And so the lesson that day was basically being open to having sex whenever, if you're in a marriage relationship. But the way that she did it is that the man's brain, basically like the whole thing was like sex. And then the woman's brain, the whole thing was, it said headache, like labeling us that, number one, women never want to have sex, but they're always supposed to. And neither one of those things are necessarily true. And that men are always wanting to have sex all the time, and they should be accommodated no matter what if you're their wife. And it's those types of things that are very generalized and not necessarily specific to me, but those are the messages that are constantly washing over you.
Yeah.
Who you're supposed to be, who you're supposed to love, who you're supposed to end up with. And while we're on the subject of dating at Bob Jones and like the way that they handle that, especially for women, there was also a side that made you scared to death to want to get married or date anybody, because they would tell all of these horrible stories about women who were good girls. They were ministry oriented and all of these things. And they marry somebody who is wrong for them, and all of the terrible paths that leads them down, and like very nitty gritty details of how horrible their lives end up, and how, that one decision completely ruins their whole life. And so it's a lot of, not to be for nothing, but it's a lot of conflicting messages too. You're supposed to date. You've got to suppress that urge to be by yourself if you don't want to date. They really encourage you to get out and about and do those things. But they, at the same time, they scare you and tell you that you have to make the right decision. And it's very possible for you to make the wrong decision. And here's all of these, so much of it was fear at the same time. And that feels like pretty much any subject matter area that you're going to be talking about. It was, this is who you're supposed to be. Get out there and do it. And then also do it wrong. Because if you do it wrong, it's not even about, it's your soul is on the line. Your family's on the line. Everything about your life will be in a shambles if you do it wrong and make the wrong decision.
And it's such a paralyzing thing. Mm-hmm. Even when you get out of fundamentalism, where you're so afraid to make the wrong decision that you're going to be on a path of destruction and pain for the rest of your life because of that. It's paralyzing. And something I wanted to dig a little bit more into and go back with the messaging where they're talking about, men and women's brains, the roles that they think men and women should play. I've heard things about purity culture being rape culture. Mm-hmm. Women are reduced to an object. There's something that's to be used and abused in a sense. They're not a human being. They're very dehumanized in that environment. And there was a preacher that recently went viral and got a lot of backlash for just kind of having a rapey joke that was rooted in purity culture, where he said, women, I'm paraphrasing, but he was basically saying, women on your wedding night, you do whatever the man wants. Like, you bend over, let him do whatever, because he's been waiting so long for this. So you let him have his way with you.
And it's all about his needs.
Yeah.
And it's always about protecting him. It's never about your needs as half of the couple. And I will say that I myself, I'm not really in Bob Jones circles anymore. I feel like my faith has evolved beyond that in a lot of different ways, I think. But even after you kind of come out of that culture and you're no longer in those churches or what have you, you've got a mixed bag of friends and people that you know who are still in it, different places on their journey with that whole thing. And the people who were still in it, they would have books where they would be like, you need to read this book because this book says that women should be happy and fulfilled in their sex lives too, and it was like such a revelation. It was like such a new thing because that's not the main message. And yeah, it's such a funny thing because there was all these messages about, well, if it's not you, it'll be somebody else, or keep it contained. Don't do anything. Don't even touch yourself. And then all of a sudden on the wedding night, you turn into somebody who is just wild and has all this prowess about them and whatever. Yeah. So it's, again, yourself out of the ability to steer your own car, go your own direction, go at your own pace even. And it is very much about you are on track to serve. You don't matter. Suppress anything that tells you that you do so that you can go along to support the people who really matter, people who can preach, people who can teach and be in front of people, because that's not your role.
Yeah, so it's all these rules around submitting to an authority figure. And how did that affect you hearing about this? You would always have to submit, always have to obey authority.
It's kind of funny because while I was at Bob Jones, so I've always been a rule follower, my day job, even now. And you go back and you look at these things and you go, okay, is this because I chose this, or is this just what happened to me because of the type of person that I was? But even now, my day job is in human resources. So not the most exciting stuff ever, but it's the rules and compliance and guiding people towards that. And so I was at Bob Jones, however, such a rule follower. I had issues with following the rules, however, and I'll get back to the authority figure thing. But for me, I had semesters where like early on, I would get like less than 20 demerits or something like that. And demerits were this arbitrary thing that they would calculate. It's like points for being bad. So if you got points for being good, like I care, whatever, then you would get negative points or demerits for being bad. And then once you got up to 150, I can't remember the number. I think it was 100 demerits, you would get expelled. At 75 demerits, you would be socialed or campus, which means that you can't go off campus. You're not supposed to have conversations with the opposite gender anywhere except for within class hours and classrooms. And there were some other restrictions, like if you get socialed, technically you're not supposed to hold like spiritual leadership positions, all kinds of stuff. 50 demerits, they make you go to discipline committee every time you get a demerit. And for those who don't understand what discipline committee is a room that they set up in the alumni building, which is a building on campus that a lot of like main classes are taught. So language classes, English classes, some Bible classes are in there. But on the first floor of the alumni building, there would be this long line of students going into this little room, and it would be dorm counselors and dorm supervisors and dean of men and dean of women staff who would sit there, and they would hear about whatever offense you had committed. You would be summoned to discipline committee, and you would have a couple of times during the day that you could go. You had to make time during your busy schedule to go and stand in line. Sometimes if the line got long, you might have to have a whole hour and a half to stand in line, which was a big sacrifice. And then, you would have to go and tell them what you did if you didn't do it. And then they could remove that demerit for you or not. So at 50, you had to go every time you got a demerit. And then I think if you were less than 25 demerits, you got a good girl or a good boy letter sent home to your parents, which said that you got less than 25 demerits or whatever number it was for the semester, and how like outstanding and exemplary that your son or daughter is. So, but anyway, just to kind of give that framework, my last semester of my senior year, I think I had gotten all the way to like 76 demerits or something like that. And it was stupid little things. Like I didn't do any one big thing, but something happens and you don't go to class for whatever reason. That's 25 whole demerits. I don't think that happened to me, but they increase the demerit load. So like if you have to clean your room, you have a room job. So for me, I was vacuuming. I would leave early in the morning. My roommates would come in and eat breakfast in the room and there'd be crumbs all over, and I would get dinged for room jobs all the time because I have vacuuming. And so, you get that times and they only give you one demerit each time, but then it goes 2 for the next 3 times that you get it. And so they build and compound over time. I'm 5 minutes late to everything. And I was late to classes all the time. I was really checked out because it was my last semester of my senior year. My great grandmother passed away. I was in the opera. Like all of these things happened that made me not think about getting demerits, because you have to think about it. Let's be honest. You have to really try to not get demerits. And, I was living my life. I was a music major in operas and, doing my thing on campus. I do remember at the time, I cannot go back to my room because I didn't want to be there. Like I wanted to be out and about because I didn't want to be around the dorm staff. They spewed me out. So anyway, I had gone the whole semester. There was maybe a week or 2 left in the semester. There were 2 things at play. So I had 76 demerits. 75 demerits means that you're campus. So even though I would have been campus for only a couple weeks, that meant that the next semester when I came back, I couldn't have any spiritual leadership positions. I was supposed to be a graduate assistant in the voice department teaching, and that's considered a spiritual leadership position. So I would have lost my GA-ship. I also, that summer, been traveling and raising support with the musical mission team. For listeners of the podcast, Erin Birchwell, her parents led a mission team every summer to Europe, and they would go to different countries in Europe, and we would sing a big choir. Her dad is a choir director and voice teacher, and we called them Dr. Dad and Dr. Mom, and we would go with them. And I was super excited because I was going to Germany, and I just mentioned earlier that I wanted to be a missionary to Germany, and this was a way that I could do it with music. I was so jazzed about that, and that I would not have been able to go on if I had ended the semester with 76 demerits. And when it comes to authority on the campus, you really kind of just have to know who to talk to. And I went to my dorm supervisor, and she was so unwilling to help me. And really all that you do is you go and talk to them, and it's in some computer system, and they can take those demerits away if they believe your story. And so for me, I was telling the story about how my roommates were causing the issues with room jobs. And there was all of these situations with, having to be gone for my great grandmother's funeral and all this kind of stuff. And I remember and I was emailing back and forth with my dorm supervisor. She was kind of in and out for whatever reason, but she was just very aloof and not willing to help me. Because I was on the musical mission team, there was a dorm counselor. Her name is Heidi. I think she may have been brought up in a negative light by some other folks on the podcast, but she was very kind to me. I don't know what I did. I definitely was not in the in crowd as far as like the Bojos. I never made it to PC. I was only a lowly APC, or assistant prayer captain, instead of a prayer captain, because I wasn't spiritual enough to get promoted to be a prayer captain, that kind of thing. And I was definitely not of the spiritual elite at Bob Jones by any means, but for whatever reason, she heard my story, and I finished the semester with 73 demerits. And it was as easy as a conversation. And it took a little doing because I had to talk to one person, and that was a dead end. And then I had to talk to somebody else. So my view of authority kind of became a lot slanted, to be honest, because authority wasn't something to be taken seriously at that point. Because as much as I wanted to be devoted to serving God, I knew that some of these things were just crazy. I just knew that some of these things were just not conducive to living a regular life, even as a Christian. For me, authority after Bob Jones began to be something to work around, something to do things in spite of what they say, not because of what they say. And so I had to kind of realign and think, number one, your critical thinking skills have to turn on enough to say, okay, what is this person really saying? What does that mean for me? How would I put this into practice in my life? And so you really have to kind of turn that part of your brain on after turning it off for so long. But definitely, it kind of gave me a weird view of authority. I was constantly trying to hide from authority. There were times when friends and I would sneak off campus, especially after I became a GA, because those Friday faculty meetings, they didn't always take attendance in. If I could go off campus for an hour or two, and usually all of, what we were doing, the heinous things that we were doing to go off campus when we're supposed to have been in chapel, we went to McDonald's. Like the things that we did to have some semblance of freedom and to get away from authority were so simple and so like pure. Like I had a friend who his grandparents were missionaries and his grandparents were away, but they had their house. And so he had a key to his grandparents' house that was uninhabited. So I was a graduate assistant. I could go off at any time. They were two undergrads, but somehow they could go off campus like they wanted to. We would go off to watch American Idol every week and bake cookies in his grandparents' oven. And, I just think back on those things. We weren't trying to do anything awful or terrible. Like we were not evil people, but the things that we would have gotten really castigated for or gotten a ton of demerits for or whatever were just little moments away to breathe and be normal. And I think that was the other thing, is that authority was always breathing down your neck. And I would say that in my adult life now, I still feel that. And I've had a lot of anxiety that I've had to work through, because I tell my fiance all the time, I'm like, stop trying to manage me, or don't tell me what to do. And it's not because we fight or anything like that, but it's because I'm constantly trying to see, like, where am I being put into a box? That doesn't feel good. I'm not going to be put into a box anymore. Like I need a moment to breathe.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that is a struggle for a lot of survivors with that authority. There's just, you have that automatic negative association with it. And it's like, oh, you don't really care about me. You're just trying to control me and get me in trouble and have that power over me. Sadly, like even in the outside world, there are people that are still like that. They want to have that power and that control in environments that allow them to have that. But I'm curious, I know we're getting close towards the end of our time. Are there any other like core experiences or stories you wanted to share from Bob Jones University?
I just wanted to give I think part of what I wanted to talk about was what it looks like when you really are trying earnestly, because I think so many stories that you hear about Bob Jones, and even things that I had heard from my own family, like I had tangentially known people through like cousins and things who knew somebody who had a sister who went to Bob Jones, and oh my gosh, they had a terrible time and they couldn't do anything and it was awful. And just to kind of like show you what that environment was like and how to experience it. For me personally, I really was trying my best, and I detail oriented, but that is something that I had to really build into my life. I'm a creative person, all those things that Bob Jones wouldn't like. Not responding to an email in a timely manner was a huge deal. Being late to something was a huge deal. Just like minding all of your P's and Q's and having so many things that are tied to your character that really aren't. Being on time is not necessarily a sign of good character. I know a lot of people say that it means that you're not being respectful of other people's time when you're late to an appointment. And like, I try my very best to be on time every single time. I really do. And ever since I've been alive, it's just like there are areas in my life that I'm scatterbrained, or that something happens, or, whatever. And so there was a situation kind of like that when I was a graduate assistant at Bob Jones. And there are leaders there who will give you enough runway, and then as soon as they feel like you're taking too much runway, they will check you really fast. And what I mean by that is, so I was a voice teaching graduate assistant for my master's degree, and there was a timekeeping system that they had, and I didn't have to clock in and out for my job. They had all the number of students that I had. They knew how many hours I was working, but I had to go into this timekeeping system. It's called WorkBrain. And I had to go into WorkBrain every week to say to sign off on my time for the weekend and say how many hours I had worked. And there was some reminder that got put in my junk mail box at the beginning of the semester. And so I had been getting like periodic reminders from Ed Dunbar, who was the head of the Department of Music. What complicated things more is that Dr. Dunbar was also the husband of my voice teacher. And when you are a music major, especially if you're a voice teacher, your voice is really who you are. You really trust your voice teacher a lot. There were certain things like Dr. Dunbar, like if I didn't complete assignments in his class, he would tell his wife about it, which is a FERPA violation, but whatever. So like things like that had happened. But for the most part, his relationship with me was pretty good. But I remember at the very end of my graduate assistantship, he writes me this letter, and it's like this long, detailed thing. And it says in it that it's going to be in my personnel file and it's going to haunt me forever. Basically, he had all this language in the letter. I don't even remember all of what it said. I didn't keep it. But he told me that he had reached out to me a few times in the semester to sign off on my work brain and that I still didn't do it for a number of weeks. And he told me how many weeks I hadn't done it or whatever. And he said, I completed this for you, but I'm an authority figure in your life. And I don't believe that you're even saved because you didn't do what I had asked you to do. And I asked you repeatedly in email. And he would never do this to your face, by the way. He always did it in writing. And he always did it in a way that he would say, this is going to go on your permanent record and scare you. And so he told me that I probably wasn't saved because I didn't bow to his authority. And then he questioned that I had adequate care of my students for the entire 2 years that I was teaching. He was questioning, everything about me because I said no to authority. And that was really kind of the cherry on top because that was literally a week or two before I graduated. And I remember by the time, and like I said, I was earnest. I was on the path. I wanted to be this elite Christian. I knew that Bob Jones was going to help me to get there. But by the time I got to that sixth year of my master's degree, I was just so burnt out and my nervous system was so tired of being in this vigilant state all of the time. And it was so interesting to me that the very last thing that I got from any administrator, except for the diploma that they handed me, the very last thing that I got was how terrible and horrible I was and how I wasn't probably saved because of this authority that I was bucking, And so that just goes to show you that even when you're almost out, you're almost done, they do something that tells you what a piece of shit you are. Like, sorry if I'm not supposed to curse, but it's just like the opportunity that they have to tell you how much better they are than you and how much horrible you are than any other person on the planet. They take it. Yeah, there's a lot of those experiences, but that was the very last one of my career there.
Oh, oh my gosh. Yeah, that's terrible. And it's just that black and white mindset that they did or had. And it's interesting that you brought that because, I've been doing my own, like some trauma work through I've been reading Jim Berg's Change It to His Image and then journaling triggers that come up and like why it's triggered, what are these thoughts, what was I indoctrinated with? And one of the things that came up, it was like, if you don't do everything perfectly, then you're lazy, you're undisciplined, you're no good. It defines your entire character as a person if you do one thing wrong. And just the shame. And once I wrote that down, I'm like, that is ridiculous. Once I actually wrote it down, I began to realize I'm like, that is crazy that we were indoctrinated to believe this about ourselves. And it's a way to have people self-police themselves, self-monitor to get them back in line, to conform to what they tell you. So, they have the answer to overcoming that shame. And it's so terrible that we could do, you were there for 6 years. You had all this evidence of all the hard work that you did. And then, that was nothing because if he perceived, this issue with you, and then you were just nothing. And I'm just like, oh, it's terrible. And I'm curious, coming out of a culture that is always about performance, always about the outward appearance, how did that affect you as you got out, and how did it bleed into other areas of your life?
It's funny because once I left Bob Jones, again, I was very devout. I wanted to stay on that treadmill of being the perfect Christian. I almost got a job teaching at a Christian college. I was actually passed over at the last minute, which I'm extremely thankful for because that Bible college is no longer in existence today. But at any rate, I ended up going through some time of looking for work and a lot of things right after Bob Jones. And I really just had to find my way in a lot of ways. And so much of my grappling with the Bob Jones experience was me just finding my way in the world. And that started with my job. So I was supposed to be this missionary, and then I get back home, and the summer after I went to Bob Jones, I went on a mission trip to Brazil with a Freewill Baptist missionary family and spent about 5.5, 6 weeks with them there. And at the end, I said, I would really love to learn more about your ministry. I'd love to be a part of your ministry. I've shown that I want to do this. What do I need to do to get in business as a missionary to Brazil? And the missionary family that I was staying with, this particular man was planting a church in Brazil. And he kind of just looks at me and he kind of has this disappointed look on his face and he sighs and he's like, I really love that so many women want to come on the mission field. I think that's really nice and great. And if that's what you want to do, think about it. But what we really need are preachers, and we really need men to come to plant churches. And so, again, I'm trying to find my way. I'm trying to continue on that path to be the best Christian I can be, to do what I think God is calling me to do. And I'm getting all these roadblocks because I'm a woman. So that was kind of the first. I had been getting a lot of those messages already, but I didn't know that they were out in the real world. There's kind of everybody talks about the Bob Jones bubble and kind of the messages, and you think, oh, it might not be as bad as this everywhere else. But it is, and sometimes worse. And I came home after that summer really deflated because I wanted to do the right thing. And I started working just odd jobs. I ended up moving to Birmingham, Alabama, where I was a voice teacher for a number of years. I went to an independent Baptist church there. One of the friends that I had there is on another documentary because his family had come from the IBLP cult. And so that was the type of churches that I was landing in as a new person out of college, out of my parents' house, trying to do all the things that I was doing. And it was little things that would come up over time. For me, I don't necessarily think I went through deconstruction because I didn't ever reach a moment where I thought, I'm going to deconstruct now or I'm going to leave the faith. I tried earnestly to stay there. And part of that happened just naturally. Part of it happened as a result of my coming out because I am a queer person. And the first people that I dated when I could date outside of all those environments were women. Hilariously enough, the very first date that I went on with a girl, very first time, I'm sitting across the table at this little restaurant and she tells me about her life. And she had an experience where she was working on a college campus with the Navigators. And I didn't even know that about her when we were chatting online. And so she had gotten fired from a position with the Navigators because she was seen kissing a woman. And I had gone through that experience of learning who I was and understanding that for me, equipment matters a whole lot less than the character of the person. Coming out to my parents and seeing their reactions. And I want to say that for me, I'm very lucky in that my parents are trying to come around. It is very hard work and it's a lot of uncomfortable conversations and that kind of thing. But at least, especially my mom, she really wants to know me and be in my life. And I think she's willing to kind of table some conversations because she wants to preserve that relationship. And I'm thankful for that. As long as they're willing to preserve it, I'm willing to do that work with them, as uncomfortable as it is, as long as I feel like they are loving me, all of me, all the time. That's kind of what it's looked like past that. I think more recently, beyond just making those discoveries about myself and understanding that I never can fit back in that culture again. Part of it is understanding, because I was such a performer. Not only was I a musician and I sang on campus and things like that, but we've talked about being on that performance treadmill set up by our parents, set up by our churches, all of that. For me, I had stopped listening to my inner voice really a ton. The messages that you get within fundamentalist Christianity is that your heart is, don't lean on your own understanding, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Other Bible verses that tell you how wicked and deceitful your heart is and how you shouldn't trust yourself. And again, part of that is dealing with, I think part of that is their messaging to tell you about dealing with all the cognitive dissonance that you're experiencing. It's okay. Don't worry about that. But I think for me, to a point where, number one, I was really, really angry. And I was angry for it was probably at least a solid year of just being really angry and detached from anything that had to do with religious anything. I really wanted to understand what I thought about things, because after a lifetime of not knowing what you think about things, how to live your life, what rules you set up for yourself, and how you navigate the world, I had no point of reference for that outside of that version of Christianity. And I knew I had faith in something bigger than me, and I wanted to keep that and I wanted to preserve that, but I wanted to do away with all of the harmful structure that the church had. And so I came across this class that, basically they said something in the ad like, connect with your intuition, learn to read tarot cards. And so, it's kind of a silly little thing, but it's grown into something that's become very powerful for me. And so I do quite frequently, I will pull tarot cards as a way to connect back to my own intuition. And so that's kind of become something that I really enjoy, something that I really appreciate, because that has helped me kind of get back in touch with who I am, what I really think, through kind of pulling tarot cards daily. So that's a big, explanation of what happened, but it's something that happened slowly over time. Definitely, it's not something that I just was awake and there was a switch flip, but it was a lot of chipping away at me, through those experiences, through getting paid less than some men when I was working in churches, through just the devaluing of who I am as a person because I am bi, pan, whatever you want to call it, and just really kind of stepping into who that is, what that means, and kind of busting through some of that all or nothing stuff. So that's my life's work at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And yeah, your journey is so inspiring of like going from this rule follower to, in a sense, this rebel. And I say rebel in air quotes, but like really becoming your own person, which they really don't want, and connecting back with your intuition and say, no, like I think I do know what's best for me. And it is so, so hard to work through, but I'm really glad to see where you are on your journey. But is there any last thing you would like to say?
Well, I know that we don't have a ton of time, but I can do a little collective reading for anybody listening, just like a quick little 3-card thing if you want. Do we have time for that?
Sure, let's do it.
You're like, I don't know. I've never done this before.
Let's get into it. Yeah.
All right. Give me just 1 second and I'll pull a few cards.
Yeah, that's fun.
All right. So I think the questions that I'm going to ask are just like anybody who is listening to this podcast, anybody who interacts with it. We'll do a past, present, and a future. So who were we in the past? Who are we at present? And who are we becoming?
Okay.
As that collective of people who are rebuilding our faith, maybe challenging some of the old things that we're talking about, calling on any spirits or guides to help that are in line with our highest best. Okay. So for our past, we got the 7 of Swords. So this person is somebody, sometimes this card is like the schemer card, people will call it, somebody who is trying to get around things. It's a strategy card. I like to think about this. So this is of the sword suit. In tarot, swords mean that they're our thoughts, the messages that we think about ourselves. So this person is taking certain messages and leaving others. And so what I would say is who we're in the past is in control of the messages that we're landing. And our coping mechanisms that we used to have are not going to work for us anymore. The strategies that we used to have are not going to work for us anymore. And that's okay. Outgrowing our old patterns and our old thoughts is what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to stay the same. And with this being a seven is a card. Usually sevens deal in numerology with kind of your own sphere of control, your own self. And so it just kind of goes back and resonates. Like we used to be people who were taking in messages. We took what we could. We were strategizing how to get out of the ones that were uncomfortable as much as possible, but we're outgrowing those old ways. And then I got another seven, but it was a reversed card. But this is what it looks like normally. It's a 7 of cups. But I got it reversed. So as you can see, there's all these little cups on the card and the cups are reversed. So that means that the cups are all pointing upside down and all of the cups have something different. Like there's a little pearl, there's a snake in one, there's like a little like laurel leaf thing. So basically that's saying that at present, we have a lot of choices for how we live out our dreams, how we connect back into ourselves. And so I think it's just reminding us that even though we got 2 sevens, that who we used to be and who we are now is very different. And even if you don't feel like you have a lot of choices or that choices are slipping through your fingers because of your past, that's not the case. And then the last card for what I got for who we're becoming is the Page of Swords. And I'll kind of show you, Andrew. But it's, a young person who has a sword. So swords, again, we had a swords card for that first card who we're becoming. We're still working with our brain chemistry, our thoughts, all of those things within swords. And the pages is somebody who is so rooted into their inner purpose. And so I find it really lovely, actually, because it was just a quick little 3-card pull and something kind of silly to do at the end. But you think about the fact that we got 2 sevens, which tells us a lot. 7 is something that's around setting up our sphere of control. What can I control? What can I manage? And then we've got 2 cards that are swords, which is all about the messages and the thoughts that we tell ourselves. And so with it being the Page of Swords, they're very connected to their purpose. And so what I think this is saying is go back to your original purpose. Go back to what it is that makes you feel alive. And really, swords are around communication too. So that could be your story even. So what is your story? And so who you're becoming is somebody who is ultimately tied to your purpose in such a way that you can't help but share that story in a way that is going to benefit other people. And what it's saying to me is that who you are now, you have all of these choices. Now's the time when you are living your life. We weren't living at Bob Jones. We weren't really living. We were half of a person. We had experiences that were so truncated. We didn't even have experiences that other people had because of how managed we were. And I think this is saying that actually you can take control of those messages. You can sift through them, see what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And you can wield your story like that 2-edged sword to slice through the bullshit and to get to the good stuff, what's really aligned with you. So that's a little message for the collective today.
Wow, that's really powerful. I got chills as you were saying all of that, and it really resonated with me a lot. So yeah, thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anytime. I am building my social media following for a tarot card, hopefully to help folks recover from religious trauma through tarot reading. Check out on TikTok, Midnight Sunflower Tarot. And then, I'll have some other things because I'm just starting to kind of develop that as a little side hustle, but super excited to get to read for other people, something I've been doing for the last several months.
Amazing. Well, I can't wait to see the work that you'll do with that. And for people, I'll link that in the show notes so go check out her work. But thank you again, Rebecca, for coming on the podcast.
It was such a pleasure. And
It
thanks
was.
for creating a space for people to get to share some of these things. It's really important for me just listening back to the podcast. So thanks for all the good work that you've been doing.
Oh, of course, you're so welcome. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond BJU. If you are listening on Apple Podcast or on Spotify, if you could leave a 5-star rating, this will help other listeners just like you discover the show. Thank you.